He is Paul Cambria. He is president of PFC Media. He is a long tenured sports media executive. And on the On to Something podcast with me, he is going to tell his story, his triumphs in the business, what he has weathered through to be the success he is today. Learn more about his life as well and his journey overall. I'm Bryan Fenley. This is the On to Something podcast, and I am a national anchor for Fox Sports Radio, broadcaster for live events on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. So, Paul, really appreciate you doing this. Let's begin with something that you're working on right now. Obviously, in the MMA space, this is an important part of what you're doing at PFC Media. Your decision to go down that road, what all went into that?
Well, we had a relationship with this CFFC, Cage Fury Fighting Championships. We've been producing their shows for the past 2 years, going on 3 years now. And myself and my cousin, Fred Cambria, we decided that we wanted to have a little bit more stake in the game, if you will. And so we created PFC Media, and we're looking to expand our partnership with CFFC, do some more stuff, more shows, and possibly also look at some other MMA organizations out there that may need help with their broadcasts.
Where does your fandom come out when you're broadcasting MMA and the effect it has on you as a consumer?
Well, we just had this past January, we did a fight for the CFFC. And, I've been doing this for over 15 years now. And we had the bloodiest fight that I've ever seen and been a witness to. And I was just blown away by, at that point, when you're in the seat and you're sort of watching things go down, that's when the fan comes into, and you're just like, I can't believe what I'm seeing and what I'm watching. It was incredibly exciting, and a thrill to be a part of that show and that broadcast. And so those are the moments where, like, the fight becomes more than just a fight, and it becomes an event. That's where things really happen.
How about you fighting hardest when it comes to your career? We talk about the space of MMA, but you personally, when, Paul, have you had to fight hardest for what you believe in what you want to do in this business?
So I had an interesting sort of moment a few years ago, just before the pandemic happened, where I was actually approached to produce the CFFC by a former colleague of mine, Dave Schaller, who is now the vice president of communications for the 76ers. But way back in the day, he was working for the WEC and then went to the UFC, and did all the communications for the UFC at that point. And at that point, I was working for Echo Entertainment, which is a place that, I consider home in some cases professionally. I've worked there 3 times over the course of my career. Their owner of the company, Hugh Arian, is a really good friend and a mentor. And at the time, I was doing more production management type stuff. I was their director of production and more helping with crews and not necessarily content. But I always wanted to get into producing and sort of sitting in the big chair, if you will. And I saw this, the CFC opportunity, as a chance for me to do that. And so I did the first couple events sort of under the radar, if you will. And I just sort of took my own time, time off, if you will, to go out and do it. And I realized that, I could do it. I had a passion for doing it. I enjoyed being in that chair and producing events. And so that was a moment for me to sort of choose something that I wanted to do and sort of grow my skills and my talent, as opposed to just sort of sitting back and, doing the production management thing. And which is something, I can do in my sleep, and I don't even have to think about it. It's become such second nature. So trying something new and expanding on my skill set was important for me to, keep growing as a professional.
In growing and expanding your skill sets, how do you like to be recognized for your work?
Well, um, it's always nice to hear from the organization that you're producing for, that the show is doing well. Clients. We're all in the business of serving somebody, and as long as I'm serving my client and doing a good job for them, and they know about it, and they keep asking me back, that's where I get my thrill.
How about the thrill of being a dad? What does
So,
that look like?
the thrill of being a dad has its ups and downs for sure. I have two boys. One's 21. He's a junior up at Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara. I mean, Santa Cruz, University of Santa Cruz.
Sure.
Um, and then I have another son, and he's a senior out here where I live in Stevenson Ranch, California, in West Ranch High School.
Yeah.
And it certainly changes. It's a lot different from when they were little cute kids running around, 5 or 6, until they're growing up, and the problems get a little bit more complicated, and certainly the money flowing out of the pocket
Yeah.
certainly expands. But yeah, it's great being a dad. I love my sons. They're really great individuals.
How do you see the way you attack being a dad, how you have this zest for life, and how, and in any way that parallels your love of what you do from a business standpoint, and how you can see some similarities between both avenues?
Well, it certainly helps. My professional life helps my personal life, especially with dealing with my boys in terms of trying to teach them about how to sort of live life in a professional way. And I've certainly been more doing that as they get older, and I sort of have different conversations with them, especially my junior at college. He's going to be out in the marketplace pretty soon, and it's just those little things about networking and making contacts, and following through with people. All those sort of life lessons that you learn over your career. I'm sort of trying to tell him this is how you need to do things and how you're going to succeed. As opposed to, 10 years ago, it was, hey, are you doing your homework? How's it going with girls? It's very different. And so it's those professional lessons that you learn can certainly help in terms of helping them grow as individuals.
Paul Cambria is with me, president of PFC Media, longtime sports media executive. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio. So you talked about the importance of following through. How, in your own rise in the business, Paul, has following through paid off for you?
Oh, it means everything. I mean, to me, that extra step that you go through to have good client relations, and dealing with crew and dealing with other people that you work with, it just shows that you're there and you're thinking of them, and your interaction with that individual and that person means something, that you're willing to follow up, you're willing to follow through, and to make sure that that person is happy and content. And if they're not, then how can you change things so that we can improve the relationship? I think following through and making sure that everything's copacetic is incredibly important.
How has, and speaking in positives here, how has self-talk and just constructive, I guess, self-evaluations and criticisms of yourself made you better at your job, and sort of pushed you to new challenges and to expand what you want to do and accomplish?
Everybody gets a little bit complacent at times, and that's where I think you can look back and you can the self-talk. Hey, get on this. You got to do this. That all matters, because ultimately it's about being productive, and it's about having good relationships with people. And so, yeah, it's definitely a huge aspect.
When you talk about all of these ideals and y- following through and the ways in which you're driven. Where does that all come from initially from you, Paul? Those things don't just emerge. What was it like for you growing up in that you take a lot of what you learned then and have now channeled it into what you're doing now?
Well, I definitely think it relates back to my father and my upbringing. My dad was an incredibly hard worker. He worked for Xerox for practically his whole career in the service industry. And I used to hear stories about him from other coworkers and talking about how he was the first person there at work and he was the last to leave, leading by example. um, I didn't really know too much what exactly he did. I know that, he was helping customers have their Xerox machine serviced. But I don't really know what that all entails or means. But I certainly understood from him the value of work ethic, and trying to do as much as you possibly can for yourself and your client, your business.
Let me leave you with this, Paul, and Paul Cambria is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. How much do you feel like the road that you've carved out, the success that you're having, is partially due to wanting to meet or even surpass what your
Mhm.
father did?
No, absolutely. It's a little bit different because of the different business that we're in. Um, but it's also more about making him proud. He is no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago. But certainly that was a huge drive for me through, grade school, high school, college, and now professional life, is to be, the son that would make my father proud, productive citizen, and a professional who people value and trust and like to be around.
You continue to make him proud. You are continuing to make your clients proud, and the fans are noticing. As president of PFC Media, this is only the start. You're going to grow. It's going to be fun to see what you do with this and branching out and doing all sorts of neat projects. Paul Cambria on the Onto Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio. Paul, thanks so much for giving us a little introspection and reflection on your life, your upbringing, your background, and what you really are driven towards and where you're going with this. I'm excited to see what's next for you. Really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate yours.